Hello everybody and welcome back to the Maniacal Mini. Today we are working on the Murknob with Belcha Bana. The first thing I'm going to start off with is the Zenithal highlight. That's white over a black primer. And we are coming in now with Dark Oath Flesh contrast paint. We are going for a little bit of a different look with these orcs. I was watching Lord of the Rings and decided that these guys fit that profile a lot more than they did the greenskins. So we are going to work on a much darker skin tone today. So we will pick it up in a second. Bringing in Blood Reaver Flesh layer paint from Games Workshop. This is going to serve as our highlight over the skin. This is a perfect highlight layer, so we are just going to hit the most raised edges of the face here, as you can see, and we will work on the arms and the hands, any other flesh pieces that we can find. So I wanted him to have this almost like dry old face paint on, kind of like a war paint. So we're going to bring in some Screaming Skull from Games Workshop, and we are just going to lightly coat the front of the face, just sticking to the raised edges again. We're not trying to coat the whole face, but just the raised edges to get that kind of look of like crackly old white war paint. So we are going to start, and what is probably the darkest part of our scheme is going to be his patch flesh coat. So I'm going to come over all of these flesh patches with Peccatum Flesh ink, and that is from Green Stuff World. That is going to set a undercoat for all of our flesh tones, kind of just to set like that pinkish red, almost purplish that would set in from, you know, old aged skin. So we're just going to coat all of the skin coat pieces now in that Peccatum Flesh. So we're going to start picking out the individual flesh patches now. The first one we're going to be doing is Bugman's Glow from Games Workshop. We are going to be sticking to the highlighted portions of it, so that's the top raised edges, any of the flat pieces that would catch that sunlight. Everything else we're going to leave in that kind of dark reddish, blackish kind of inky tone, and we're going to start picking out other pieces in a minute. So just to point out as well, we probably will need 2 or 3 coats to get full opacity in a lot of these. The way I do that is I paint the patches up and then I kind of stipple just to raise the opacity in the most raised areas, the areas that the highlights would be the most prominent. Moving on to the second patch, this is going to be Cadian Flesh Tone. Again, you might need a few layers just to get full opacity on these. Stick to the most highlighted areas, the areas that the sunlight is going to hit, and just stipple on. Don't, you know, pile on your paint. Don't overload the brush. Just keep it nice and thin and take your time and enjoy the process. So we want to get a little variation in the skin tones on this patch flesh coat, so we're going to bring in a little Deepkin Flesh. This one's a little bit paler, and it should give a nice variation in colors as we layer over that reddish brown ink that we laid down on the patch earlier, and especially later on when we get to the streaking grime. That stage is going to add a lot of variation in color to this, and Deepkin Flesh, Screaming Skull, as well as Rakarth Flesh, all of those in my opinion hold up to the Shrieking Grime very well and have these tonal variations that are just, you can't really get them with any other colors. So we're going to keep going, trucking along here. Okay, so we're only going to be bringing in a few more different skin tone colors. This one is just going to be Kislev Flesh, and we're just going to be moving on to a few others in just a minute. And this one is going to be Rakarth Flesh. This is going to be another pale skin tone color, just to kind of match the other paler skin tone, but also give a variation of how it will look later once we add all the weathering and stuff on top of that. And another skin tone color we're going to use is going to be Ungor Flesh. This one's a little bit more yellow, a little bit paler than the other ones. It won't pop or, anything like that as much, but we need to fill out some more of these patches, so we're going to use that. So just to further enforce all those skin tone colors that we laid down, I'm going to come in with a little bit of Reichland Flesh Shade from Games Workshop. We're just going to layer this all over the entire thing. Just the only thing I would say is don't use too much. We don't want it to pool. We just want it to go on nice and smooth and give a little bit more variation in the skin tones. Okay, so now we're moving on to the severed heads, as well as the hand that's sitting on top of his banner. I covered all of them in the Peccatum Ink Flesh Wash from Green Stuff World, and now I'm just going to start picking out the face on his waist with zombie flesh. That is also from Green Stuff World. It's this sickly green kind of color. I want this to look like it's kind of like diseased, infected, when it was cut off and now is just hanging on his belt. And we'll move on to a few more in a second. So for the second head here, we are just going to make this one look a little bit more bluish gray, kind of like it's been sitting there for a really long time. So we are going to go over that ink wash with a little bit of Administratum gray. It's kind of like this cool gray tone. It's a layer paint from Games Workshop, and that's going to add some variation with the almost purplish tones that the ink wash provides underneath, and we'll pick it up in a sec. Moving into the third head now, we are going to bring in Kislev Flesh again. Again, we're just going to stick to the highlighted portions. We're going to leave that Peccatum Flesh ink in the recesses, and we are going for a fresher look on this skin tone. And for the severed hand on top, this is just going to be gangrene color from Green Stuff World. It's another dirty green color, a little bit more vibrant than the zombie flesh that we put down on the head that's around his waist, but still a really, really cool color, and it's a really good combination with that reddish purple undertone from the ink wash. I'm going to be bringing in a little bit of white scar now, and we're just going to be picking out all of the teeth on the heads.
Ooh.
So we're going to begin working on the tongue now. That is just a mix of Reichland Flesh Shade and Caraberg Crimson from Games Workshop. We're just going to be coating the whole tongue in that. That'll give us a nice undertone for when we start layering on the purple in a minute.
Yeah.
Okay, moving on to the highlight of the tongue now, we are going to be using a Xerius purple. That is another layer paint from Games Workshop. We're just going to be sticking to the highlighted areas again, leaving the black and that reddish purple in the undertone in the recesses, and we're going to pick it up in a minute from that point.
What happened?
So now we're going to be picking out the sores on the tongue with a Blood Angels contrast paint from Games Workshop. This will add a nice variation when contrasted with the purple to see that kind of poppy red, and it also is a nice red gory color, so it's going to fit in perfectly. Just to cover over the skull here, we are going to be bringing in a sepia ink from Green Stuff World. That'll set a nice base coat for a bone color, but we are going to come over with one highlight layer in the next step. And for the highlight on that skull, we are going to be using Sun Bleached Bone from Green Stuff World. That's a kind of like muted down color. If you were looking for a Games Workshop alternative, I would say it's more like a Morghast Bone. Not quite as harsh as a Morghast Bone, but definitely along the same lines. Okay, so we are just going to finish up these heads here so we can move on to something else, and that is going to be a Space Wolves Gray contrast paint for the beard on the one head, and for the hair on the newer flesh tone head, we are going to be using a Nazdrag Yellow contrast paint, and we will be moving on to the armor in just a minute. Okay, so we're going to be moving into the metallics now. I wanted something that was going to contrast really, really harshly with the kind of muted down skin tones as on the orc as well as on all the flesh patches. So I went with this Siren Scale Green from Green Stuff World's Metallics. It's a really awesome, like, kind of just muddled down green metallic, but we are going to be going over it in one more step with a contrast paint that's going to kind of bring out its true colors, and we're going to see how it looks in the next step. So we're going to be bringing in some Creed Camo contrast paint. What this is going to do is it's going to take away almost that brightness of that Siren Scale green, and it's going to change it and alter it to look more like an army green, as you can see from the face shield around his chest. And it's also going to pre-weather, because this Creed Camo has almost some brown tones in it, so you're going to start to notice it looks like some dust and dirt buildup around the face shields, and that adds a really cool effect. Okay, so for our other metallic, we're going to be bringing in a tin metal. This is from Green Stuff World Metallic. This is a really bright tin color. It'll also hold up really well when we put over the streak and grime, as well as some rust effects and some corrosion textures. I feel like the brighter you go with your silvers, the more variation in color and tone you can get later when you do your weathering. Kind of the darker metals are a little bit harder to get across, because once you put the streak and grime on it, it kind of dulls down the metal and the shine, and then you're adding over a corrosion and everything on top of that. So my suggestion for when you're doing heavy weathering and stuff like that is to go just a little step brighter than you normally would on your metallics. Okay, so since we only have a few spots for leather, like these bags on his belt and the leather straps around his legs, we're just going to be using snakebite leather contrast paint. My only suggestion is to make sure that you're not pooling too much, don't overload your brush, and just make sure you're putting it on nice and smooth. And now for the fun part, we are going to come in with AK Interactive Streak and Grime. This is thinned down a little bit with mineral spirits, but we're going to be coating the entire model from top to bottom in Streak and Grime. We want to make sure we get a nice even coat and don't let it pool up too much in recesses, and we're just going to let it dry for a tiny bit after it's done. Okay, so we are going to move in and get our Q-tip with a little bit of mineral spirits, and we are going to gently start working off that streak and grime from earlier. Just make sure you don't rub too hard, because we do not want to work back down to the plastic. We just want to remove it from the...
Did you scare her?
So I'm going to grab a slightly larger dry brush, and I'm going to start stippling on some corrosion texture all over the metallics on the model. So the face banners, the silver that we have on his back is going to get a little bit of corrosion texture. Just try to not let like hanging pieces stay on there. Try and form it up if you have to with a hobby knife or anything like that. We want it to look as realistic as possible. So now we're going to start building up our rust colors. So over all those corrosion patches that we laid down, as well as any rivets, any things that are poking out around, we're going to start building up that rust from a dark rust color. These are all from Green Stuff World's rust collection, so we're working from the darkest rust color, and we'll pick it up in subsequent steps with lighter and lighter and lighter rust colors, working in smaller and smaller patches, just to give the illusion that, you know, the topmost is rusting just a little bit, but we have some really deep rusting and corrosion a little bit further down into the metals. This one will be that medium rust color. It's a little bit more reddish brown. We're just going to be, like I said, working in smaller patches of each color as we go up the scale of colors. So this one will be, you know, not as heavy-handed as the dark reddish one that we did, but a little bit free with it, and just have fun. And moving into that lighter rust, this one is starting to hint more towards orange, so we're going to start going into smaller and smaller patches of this one, eventually leading into our bright orange pop color in a minute. And for our final coat of rust, it's just going to be that very bright orange rust, and we're just going to be picking out very slight areas of this one. So I wanted to give this tongue the look like it was still slimy and slobbery, like he just cut it out of a monster's head. So I'm going to take a little bit of wet effect fluid from MIG, and it's just going to give this kind of glossy look to the tongue. Not so much as like a gloss varnish would, but almost, I mean, apropos to the name, just a very wet effect fluid. And just to add a little variation, I'm going to take a bile effect from Green Stuff World, and we're just going to dribble this down the banner underneath and around the sides of this tongue, just to make it look like a poison was falling out of it, or just kind of really gross slime. So I had purposely left this step until this point because all the weathering effects that we did, as well as using the Q-tip to kind of work off that streak and grime earlier, it would have worn off this paint anyway, so we would have had to retouch up. So I saved it until last, but we're just going to paint in the threads that hold this patchwork flesh together. So I'm just going to use a little Abaddon Black to pick out all the threads in that. For our last effect, we are going to bring in some coagulated blood and true blood, and this is more of just a spattering and just kind of stipple work along the flesh patches, just to make it look like, obviously, some of these people struggled to keep their flesh on their body, but he wasn't having that. So just some random patches here and there just to make them look a little bit more gory. Okay, so we're going to move into basing this guy now. This is going to be Muddy Ground texture from AK Interactive, part of their texture line. I absolutely cannot promote their texture line highly enough. They make the best textures. Everything holds together so perfectly, and they're very easy to fix, very easy to clean up, and I can't recommend them more. I definitely suggest everybody go out and at least try one throughout your hobbying and painting career. So we're just going to kind of load this onto the base here, and we're going to fit him to it just to make sure that we have enough patchwork, and then we're going to push in a little spot to fill in with a little bit of swamp water. Okay, so we're going to bring in some swamp gel from AK Interactive. This will dry. I know it looks a little weird right now. It kind of looks like some gross, weird putty, but when it dries, it's actually going to kind of mute itself out and become a really natural looking swamp color. It's going to get this really cool feel and effect to it, something that's going to play really well in our swamp. And we've added our tufts. These are swamp tufts, and now we're just going to be painting the rim of our base with some Steel Legion drab, and after that I think that will cover it for this one. I want to just thank you guys so much for watching it. I hope you come and subscribe if you're not a subscriber, like if you enjoyed this one so we can keep bringing you more content, and if you did, thank you so much, and we will see you in the next video.